Good morning, everyone. It's really good to be here with all of you. And for a lot of you, it's putting a three-dimensional being with a face that I've seen on a square or seated around a table on Zoom. My name is Kelly Griffin. I'm a strategic planning consultant based in Washington, D.C. It's nice to be here in Columbus. The last time I was here in late January, we had that snowstorm. So this weather is preferable both for traveling and getting around town. And I'm really excited to be here with all of you. I thank you all for the engagement that you've had thus far with the process. Why I recognize so many faces is because that I've interviewed many of you and some of you sit on the steering committee. Like I said, it's very nice to be here in the flesh. And really excited to get your, like Lisa said, get a discussion going around the strategic plan, because this is your plan, not my plan. It's certainly not my plan. And so we'll all own this plan together. So just kind of a reminder on kind of the current situation and what you're looking for. Your current situation is you feel that you are the backbone of workforce development in this area. And you want more people to be with you in that belief and understand that a lot of what happens in workforce development comes through the board and because of the board. And as you all know, there are a lot of shifts that have happened and that are happening that are impacting both economic and workforce development. And so you want to be responsive to that. You want to be ahead of that. You want to be excited about that. And so what you're looking to do is build this clear, actionable strategic plan for the next couple of years, 2023 to 2026. What we also want to do through the process is engage a lot of different stakeholders. So like I said, it's so nice to see so many familiar faces and some faces that are less familiar that are getting familiar to me now. We also engaged a lot of different stakeholders in this process, from employers to academics to other workforce providers to people at the city and county level and state level, actually, as well as folks from other workforce development boards in other parts of the country getting their kind of advice and their experience. So we were able to productively engage a lot of different folks. And then lastly, the work doesn't end here. This is a very important day because this is when you will all consider this plan and approve it to move forward. And after that happens, I feel like this table is in a weird space. I want to like be dancing.
Well, you are a dancer.
That is true. The work doesn't end today, though. After today, I will be working mostly with staff on putting together annual priorities and metrics so that this plan has legs. And we are all confident and ready to execute, and we know how we're going to be measuring our progress. So just kind of a review. This is the process. This is where we are. It's very exciting. We're at the top of phase 3, which again is that the annual priorities and the metrics and then the implementation plan. You can see at the bottom the roles. So the steering committee, which was made up of board members and staff members, have been carrying a lot of the water up until kind of now-ish. And then it's going to, after board approval, the responsibility for the plan will really shift more to staff again in creating the metrics and populating the implementation plan. And just, again, a little snapshot of the timeline. I've already kind of talked through this, but we're in the home stretch. So just quickly to review, and I promise you guys that this meeting is not going to be all me talking at you. This is just the beginning part, but just wanted to do a little bit of a review of the data behind this draft. It didn't come out of one or two people's heads. It came out of a lot of listening and discovery, as we strategic planners say. So one of the buckets was this desk research, and thank you to some of you who shared studies with me and reports and surveys. with me. I read a lot of surveys around both workforce development and economic development in this region and in the state to help inform all of this. I also had the benefit of your job center exit surveys, both quantitative and qualitative data from that, and as well as a statewide survey done by another workforce development board to kind of add color to the job seeker experience in the state. On internal insights, I spoke with a lot of you. I spoke with a lot of staff, getting kind of from inside the house perspective on the board's current work and the board's potential work, right? The board's potential impact. And then lastly, like I mentioned earlier, I spoke with a lot of external folks, so employers, workforce providers, state, county, local officials, and other workforce development boards in other parts of the country in areas that are demographically and sort of developmentally similar to Columbus and Central Ohio. And so the kind of pieces of data were around economic development, the workforce landscape, so both what has been true, what is true, and what will be true in terms of the kinds of jobs and industries that are available in the area, demographics and job seeker trends. So what are the demographics of folks who are looking for work? What are they looking for? What are they finding or not finding? What are their barriers to employment? I think I know you all know, and I have learned that things like transportation and housing and geographic distribution, childcare, right? These are all barriers that I heard about. I also heard what job seekers want, what they want from they want housing and they want transportation to get to jobs, but also I heard about what they want from their employers. And then I also heard what employers need from the workforce development ecosystem, what their needs are, what their challenges are, and what the gaps in their knowledge and data are. And then, so what I did with all of those interviews is I created a SWOT analysis, so strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Again, thanks to many of you for your engagement with that. I know I shared it with the board, and also we had a kind of a town hall meeting where folks could call in and weigh in on that data. And I considered it to be sort of bonus advice, but since I had the opportunity to speak with some other workforce development boards, I asked them, what their best practices were, what was working for them, what new things maybe they had started doing that had resulted in breakthroughs for the work that they're doing in their areas. I also got feedback from the steering committee about your current plan, the one that ends in 2023, and heard things like that wasn't big or aggressive enough at the time, or that things had changed and now you're ready to be bigger and more aggressive. That you want to be, again, the backbone of workforce development in this region, that you want to reshape the future of work. And prepare your workforce for the jobs that are coming, right? The jobs that you see coming down the pike. You also said that the current plan doesn't address the lack of coordination in the workforce space. There's a lot of different players, a lot of overlap, a lot of noise, as some employers put it. And then that your current plan is more operational, and you were looking for something more visionary, more ambitious. And then lastly, just to share, I always say that the process is as important as the product. So just to kind of share with you all what have been the feedback points and groups throughout the process so far. So we've had the steering committee, which is again that subset of board and staff members. I had an opportunity to sit in on an all staff meeting and get staff reactions to the SWOT analysis. Also, again, shared with the broader board group and had that town hall to get reactions from the board. And then once we had a draft goals and strategies, kind of went through those loops again. So spoke with staff, shared with the board. I also shared back with the people that I interviewed who do not sit on the board, right? So the external interview folks, because when I interviewed each of them, I said, we want to keep you engaged. We really value your input, and we want to keep you engaged in this process, and we want to keep you apprised. And so I also shared back with the external folks with, don't worry, with confidential draft all over it. But I shared back with the folks that I interviewed as well and got some feedback from them. And then we had a steering committee conversation about draft goals and strategies, and have made a few layers of, we've done a few revisions already to the, what you see here today has gone through a few revisions already. And also with the steering committee, we started talking about metrics, which if we have time today, I would also love to get your feedback on some of those ideas for how we measure, because that will really help the staff as we move forward in crafting those metrics. I will pause. I'm from New York, so I speak fast. Are there any questions or comments about the process thus far before we get into the meat of the draft plan? All right. So, final draft presented to you all here for approval, for discussion and approval.
Yeah.
And so hopefully, none of this is brand new to you, right? You've seen various iterations of this, but where we have landed right now are on these 4 goals. So your vision and mission, we have not tweaked. I just have it here for context. And sometimes when a new strategic planning, when a new strategic plan is constructed, organization may choose to revisit, particularly a mission statement, right? To kind of align it. I'm not saying that we need to do that. I'm just explaining why it's there and the context. So we've got these 4 goals. The first around young people and preparing them for careers that lead to financial stability. This came from a number of the folks that I interviewed, employers who want to be reaching young people soon, from workforce providers who see the value in connecting with folks as early as, as young as 12 or 13, because the people who sit in this room and the staff of the organization know what kinds of career opportunities are going to be available 10 years from now. So for me, it kind of blew my mind, but you really can be talking to like a 12-year-old about something that, that will be available to them and that they can be ready for once they're out of school and in the workforce. Secondly, we have a goal around more job seekers being matched to opportunities that lead to prosperity. So you have prosperity in your foundational documents. That I will say this goal, when this goal was born, it was specific to mid-level opportunities and mid-level employees, because that came out very strongly in the research and the interviews. The sort of mismatch between the training that job seekers have and the skills that job seekers are looking for, there seems to be a mismatch. You have people who are overqualified, you have people who are qualified for the wrong things. And then you have employers that say, we're not looking for entry level, we're looking for people with a 2-year degree or a certification or training, and they're not able to be finding them. Next, we have on the employer side, because that's an incredibly important audience for you all, that enabling employers to attract, engage, develop, and retain the talent they need to succeed. I know we've talked about, that list of verbs may need to be in a different order, because right, because sometimes employers are thinking that retention is number 1, and then acquiring someone new is the last resort, but that's a whole other conversation. But this is really focused on your service, the board's service to employers. And then lastly, that backbone, there's that backbone word again. So goal 4 is really what I heard in the interviews is that folks and some people even very close into the board, that people don't really know what the board does, right? They don't know what you are, what you do. It's kind of like, what is it, the blind men touching an elephant, right? Like people know the piece of the board that they interact with, but they don't know the breadth of what you all do, and they don't understand the how you are directing funding and how you are coordinating and convening, right? That people know the one thing that they know, and they don't know the whole thing. And so that goal came out pretty loudly. So I'll pause there. Any reactions? Does anything seem off? Does anything seem missing?
I have a question.
Absolutely.
So when you're data mining, did anything stand out from what you discovered after the process that's different? Was the times changed, or the things that kind of have percolated for the time that may not have been part of, things that we looked at before?
That's a really good question. I think I heard the younger people. I think that seemed pretty new to me. Probably not new in workforce development, but certainly new in what they were asking of the board.
Gotcha.
And yeah, it's really a good question. Let me think through that for a minute.
Are there things that still exist that are still challenges from that we noticed in prior?
Well, in your current plan, for example, visibility is there, right? So that's still a challenge if people are not knowing, if the feedback that I got, that people don't know what the board is, right?
And the reason those are two important, one is if we start the same problem, then we can't do what we did last time to make that change, right?
Right.
If visibility is an important part.
Yes. And I think that employers are very central in your current plan. And that was another thing that employers don't know to come to you, right? There's a lot of noise in the system. So they might go to Columbus State, or they might go to One Columbus, or right. There's not like a single point of entry for employers. So that might be another. What?
There's not an app for that.
That'll be part of it.
And there's some, there's a new revenue stream for you right there. Yeah.
And just so you know, Sean's our dancer on the board.
I was gonna say that was you, Jim. One of the things about this, Kelly, is that these goals aren't in any particular order. They're just goals, by the way. So I think that's the important thing we need to point out.
Yes,
that
thank you.
They're not in priority order. They are just our goals as an organization.
Right, yeah, the order is really just kind of, it's almost like a lifespan order, right? Like you've got your young people, then you have your people that are already in the workforce, then you have the employers that are looking for those people, and then you have the sort of foundational piece of the board. But the order is not set in stone by any means, because somebody did point out in the steering committee meeting that, does this mean this is our priority order? And if there's any confusion about that, we want to make sure, right, that we don't, that maybe we want to decide what our priority order is and list them in that way. Or if it's not, then, find a way to indicate that this is not priority order, that these are all the same level of importance.
My last question.
Mhm.
Hopefully, but it's a good question.
I hope it's
So-
not your last question.
Well, as it relates to- so you talked to, because I really love peer-to-peer type of discussions and benchmarking. And you said you spoke to other workforce development boards. Were they in peer cities like ourselves, that cities that look like ourselves, and then
Yes.
are there? So we'll hear about some of the best practices of what they're doing, so that we can kind of use that as benchmark.
Mhm. Yes, some of the best practices that they shared are reflected in the goals and strategies. Because this is just the top level, right? We're going to talk about strategies as well. But yes, there's also kind of like a separate document or a separate piece of the research that I can share as a whole.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
So just so you know, so it's Austin and Charlotte. So those are the two boards that we talk to. And we often are often compared with those two. So knowing that from One Columbus. And also, those are two CEOs that I know and admire as well, so
They were very generous with
yeah.
their input. There was no like proprietary anything. It was, yeah. They showed that.
I like these goals. They seem very clear and they seem like they will be easily translatable into metrics that we can track our progress. I am curious to know, making sure that we have a go-to, more job seekers are matched to opportunities that lead to prosperity. This is one of the things that we kind of wrestled with, in that as a workforce provider, we want to make sure we're providing training that lead to real opportunities at family sustaining wages. And we're saying that's at least $20 an hour or more. But we have a lot of employers who have needs for talent that may not be able to pay $20 an hour. And we wrestle with how do we meet or manage expectations as we establish the reputation for meeting the needs of the labor.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really a question for you all. What I heard very clearly is that is the need for those family sustaining jobs, right? And the role that the board could play in pushing employers to that. I heard that from several different factions. And like I said, this goal was first conceived specifically to the mid-level. Not to say that you wouldn't serve entry level, but to really focus there, because that seems to be the biggest pain point in the labor force.
But when I think about that, because I think about us being the backbone, I think about the system, right? I think about the Workforce Advisory Council and how some of our members, right, are better at sourcing and supporting those people who are in the entry level, right? And when we think about the system, right, it's how do we, who's the right one to serve those and help them and then push them through so that we can get them higher and higher. I mean, that is certainly an issue. Because a lot of and whether those employers, I mean, my experience has been some of those employers are not what I would consider employers of choice. But also some of those employers are great employers. Their margins are such that they can't raise wages. And I wonder if when we think about goal 3, if we start to look at building out our business solutions, all right, if you can't pay a competitive wage, what are some of the best practices we can bring to you to do other things that make that job quality higher, right? That's how I think about it, but I mean, I'm interested to know what the board thinks about that.
I have to deal with trade contractors that they're smaller and they might not look like us. They don't operate like we do, right? So when you just described the scenario and I live in all the time. And so I can't pass judgment on them because we won't work together, right? So, and I need them just like they need us. So for me, when I think about law, and it's relevant to us here, when I think of us at what I do for a living, I have to just move the needle a little bit at a time, right? So my goal might not be today, I get to where I want them to be, but if I can slowly move the needle with them, get them better and better, and get them to improve, then they get closer to where I need them to operate. So it's more of a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
Right, so I don't throw the baby out with the bathwater because someone may not completely align with what we're trying to accomplish. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that's no different than where we are, right? It's easy to dismiss people and then go on, but then at some point, then you're not effective we have a mantle and a leadership position in workforce development for which we are the pillar and we have to bring people up. So I don't think we have a choice but to try to get those. And then when someone just deliberately just goes against it, then you have to divorce your relationship. Right, so those are my initial thoughts with that kind of dialogue.
Yeah, my thoughts on that, Jim, kind of in the same vein, but I think about it in terms of scale, right? And so there's the major employers that we deal with as well that maybe can meet the prosperity wage issue, right? But then there are those smaller businesses that Don deals with every single day. There are smaller employers that are the ones that are challenged with getting there in terms of a salary level. But we have to leverage partners like the chamber and other organizations that are focused on that from a workforce development perspective to enable them to work with the companies to do what they need to do. And so I think we have to pick and choose what role we play in that, by the way. I think a lot of the stuff, when I think about that, for some of our major employers, it makes sense. I think when it comes to the smaller businesses that Dawn has to deal with, and it's to Bo's point, it's a little bit challenging. And so how do we work with those folks that stay in that space every single day that, are helping these smaller businesses get access, get the opportunities, get this, be able to educate their employees, do more in business, by the way, with the major employers, so they have the ability to grow and scale as well. So I just kind of look at it in terms of who we're actually trying to cater our work to, or enable, by the way, as a board. So that's the thing I'm kind of those dual things that I'm just struggling with a little bit.
I think both points important that we're basically saying, for the most part, the retail industry and the service industry is not where workforce development is. Because those jobs don't pay $20 an hour.
Right.
It may not be.
They may never get, they're
Right.
complaining, but they're never gonna get there. And that's most of the complaining is that you don't have workers at restaurants, grocery stores,
Yep.
where we all see it. Hotels aren't cleaning hotel rooms every day anymore. I mean, you see it in those industries. And I think that Bo's point, I think we need to be clear that we're doing it because there's an expectation from those industries that we're going to help address their needs. We're really not in that space.
And that's it. And you put your finger on the pulse of what I was saying there. And I think it's important to put it in context because we'll never get this mass perception of us being a backbone organization if there's a large segment that we're really not catering to. But we can't be all things to all people. And so I think Lisa's point was a great one because there are workforce providers who do cater to, when we talk about the economic mobility of individuals, some people aren't at a point where they're going to be ready for the prosperity wage. I like that term. But we need to bring them along. And so if we are coordinating a system, which we are with the other workforce providers, then we can talk about the role that we as a system play, even though our priorities may be on a particular segment that lead to prosperity wages. I do think it's important for us to have a message for that so that we can manage expectations.
And I think if we're enabling organizations, Bill, like yours and others that are focused on that demographic, then that's kind of what we can do. You know what I mean? I think that the fact that we're engaging with those workforce organizations that are focused in some of these areas that we may not necessarily be focused in on, but we're helping to enable and drive the work that you're doing and the work that Dom's doing. I think maybe that's our role. I don't know. I think that's up for debate. I think we need to have that debate on what exact role we play in that process.
Well, I think we got to remember too, is we're such an odd organization because we've got the job center where we do serve people.
Yeah.
And then the board staff where we're doing strategic things with business, right? But then, the board also as a thought leader is even something else, right? But we're not clearly just a service provider, like you've got all these programs, you're doing service provision through, and we're kind of doing both, and how we communicate that and where the role is. Like we're deciding two things. We're deciding we do have money that we actually provide service, but that isn't our only role. We're also, the thought leaders. So like when you think about business solutions, one of the ideas behind even having that here at the board is to do the thought leadership for on the employer side, or okay, how do we disseminate best practices around job quality issues, even if we aren't the direct ones always providing them the staff. Instead, we're doing that by helping to promote impact. And our other members of the Workforce Advisory Council and bringing, what we hope to do, right, is eventually bring more funding into the system, not to us, we've got funding, right, into the system to do those kinds of things and help move people to prosperity.
I don't know the answer, right? But I know one thing I like about what we do is we're blind to the haves and have. We want to just serve. Right, so that concept to me, it's what the benefit of having the support of the county and city is because we are here to serve. The question is, where are we going to be the most effective without creating the haves and have-nots? Right? So I don't have the answer, but the thing I like the most is that that's where we're agnostic to that. We're going to figure out where we're going down, whether it's big or small. So, and I would hate, not saying we're going to lose that, I would hate that if we lost. That to me that's a differentiator in my.
One of the areas that may cut across all of this is childcare. We really think about it from the service level, childcare is more important. You know, the rest of it, as you go up the income scale, it's a debate on how much do I pay versus what am I earning. But if you're at these entry level jobs, you don't even have a chance to start if you don't have childcare. Right. So that could be something as we develop this, that's an issue that we really push childcare as an economic workforce development issue, not as a human service issue. This is, you're not going to work.
Yeah.
Then they do where we can help.
The lunch companies will figure that out too. We do that set up child. Yeah, really good one.
The Austin Workforce Development Board has state funding to literally run childcare.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because in Texas, the boards have all of the money. They've got the tenant, they've got all the childcare, they've got all the benefits in Texas, which is not much. I would always say is great. If they have total control over that, so that you can leverage all of those things together. But in Ohio, we don't do that. We partner with the county. We love the county parish.
The word backbone, I know we're kind of chatted with it, but I also think it feels a little like back when we and I shot, with eye shades and stuff. I'm wondering if there's a way to, our power is collaboration and pulling people together and taking leadership on that. And I get the concept, but it feels, I think we should be a little more aggressive in that realm and say that we are in fact some version of a leader in facilitating and bringing together coalitions. And that is a kind of a backbone operation, but it feels soft somehow.
Well, I'll say the terminology backbone organization is within a framework around collective impact. And so that's a broader, I think it's more widely understood what you mean when you say backbone organization as part of the collective impact framework. But how we talk about it message wise, I mean, we can talk about it different.
So it sounds like, and I'm just reflecting back what I'm hearing, sounds like there might be an appetite to focus goals 2 and 3 on that prosperity wage aspect, right? So kind of taking it back to we don't have to call it that, but the mid-level concept. And for both the job seekers that you're working with and the employers that you're working with. Did I hear that wrong? I think maybe I heard that wrong because I'm seeing some. And then the goal 4 goal 1 would still be broader, and the goal 4 we could reword it, but goal 4 would be the role that you play in the whole system.
Goal 4, that's easier than the other question here. What we could say is that we want to be the backbone for collective impact. Add that in, so it's clearer, maybe.
just like the term. I just feel like we're not positioning in a leadership role. It almost, it can feel a little like back.
Behind the scenes.
Yeah, I don't know, you know.
I
But I get the concept, it is probably the right concept, but it doesn't feel,
Brian, you, if it said something like, establish us as the leader,
that kind of thing. I think we shouldn't be.
you just want to be bold and just say that we're the leader.
Well, you can be both. You can be you can be the backbone of the system, but also a leader within the
Yes,
system.
But you don't have to say you're the backbone.
I think,
I think they're nuanced, but I do think they're a little bit.
I think there's something about being central to that, like the collaboration piece. It feels like the collaboration piece all kind of intersects here.
Yeah.
And so how do you convey that in such a way that it makes sense? Because I do agree, the way we talk about it is going to be important, because if we say one of the issues we have is that employers don't understand how to use us, they may not understand what backbone really means, or may not even understand what leader means. We can be really clear around what is that, what is it that we do? We help, is it help, we help simplify or streamline, or, some of those words, and it doesn't have to be in the goal, but it will be important in terms of how we market it.
That's a great point. We've been through 2 iterations of strategic plans in the last several years. And until we really sat down with our members and held focus groups, we didn't figure out, we had to determine what their needs were first. Lisa, this would be an important place for conversation. We're going to get hit with a wave over the next 3 to 5 years. Dave Harrison's #1 degree right now is in IT. And there are going to be students with associate degrees going out to Intel and Intel suppliers, making 6 figures. And it's going to be a game changer for this whole community, because companies that are coming in, Sean, I happen to know one because I know some of the leadership that wants to come in. They want to know exactly what the salary structure is of Intel, because that's who they're going to have to compete against in the next 3 to 5 years for the best people here. Discover Card. They moved out of New Albany into Whitehall, right?
right.
Save a ton of money, taxes alone, by moving out of New Albany into Whitehall. And companies are going to have to look at how they can streamline as best as possible. They can't save money on salaries, they'll have to save money on physical plant, on taxes, on letting half of their staff work from home. Charlotte just lost a multi-billion-dollar economic development project because a huge financial services firm was moving in with a whole campus. And all the plans were made prior to the pandemic. Once the pandemic hit, the company went totally virtual. I called up Charlotte and said, forget it. We're not coming. We're going to be 100% virtual. So I think this organization can be really critical in connecting communities, workforce communities, businesses, with especially our members who are falling all over. I say this ad nauseam, 19 of our 2,300 members, 1,900 or 2,300 members employ 1 to 50 people. 2 or 3 people to them may mean the difference between a black bottom line and a red bottom line. So,
Right.
and I'm happy to help convene our small business council. You listen to them, the needs are really interesting.
Yeah, no, I believe that.
Would you agree about the gap being in that mid area that we're talking about, to get back to number 3?
Yeah, I was gonna ask that as well.
Knowing the groups that you serve and making sure that small business is perfect table, would you agree that's where the gap is?
Like something above entry level, right? That's what we need by mid levels.
People define it so different.
Right.
I might have been one of the people who had weird facial expression when you were looking around the room, but I guess where I'm struggling with is, and maybe this is why to me, having leadership in goal number 4 is so important. I'm not disagreeing with or arguing against the idea that we have a particular niche for goals 2 and 3, that mid-level. But we also have a responsibility below that, at least in terms of thought leadership and connectivity. And that's why, to me, just saying you're the backbone of the system isn't enough. Because it's incumbent upon this group as a collective to be thinking about the people below who we may be prioritizing and targeting based on the community's needs. So that's kind of, I was trying to sort of figure out how I put them together. And I think that's the way I would think about it. Because while we may be focusing on those middle tier people or jobs, there's still a responsibility of this board to be thinking about folks that are at the entry level, the service level, so.
Eric, I think that's right, and I think if we're declaring ourselves the leader, we got to think about what that means in terms of what we're doing. And have a plan in place, because saying it for the sake of saying it is one thing, but how do we put that into action and convene the right groups around the table to carry that forward?
And that's a little foundation that you were saying. Right, I mean, that's just a component of it, but that entry level person, it's impossible for them to take childcare, and that's just one aspect of it, right? Not knowing all the challenges with that. Transportation is probably another one, but they're just, and I appreciate you saying that, because if we don't have that and we don't think about that, we fail. We have failed, right?
And it may be a matter of convening or assuring that other parts of the workforce system are working properly or connected to the right residents or the right employers, but that's part of our mission too. It's not just the mid-tier piece.
Well, and I'm gonna say something that's probably gonna be controversial, but we've got to, I think Bo will agree with me, I hope you're gonna agree with me, is that, again, if we're the backbone, we also have core funding. And we're probably gonna have core funding. I don't see Congress or the president cutting our funding. Now we might get cut, not when we get from the state potentially, but we're always gonna have that core funding. But we're talking about our partners in the system who are not necessarily well funded.
Yeah.
And we have employers who need those people but aren't willing to pay for that. Right? And so I think when we think about these really hard issues, if we're gonna really embrace that, which I do think we should, and that's what goes being the backbone, then we really got to think hard about these issues. And that also means thinking hard about the other side of that equation, which is some employers who may not, they're sitting there, just give me the widget. That's what I need. I need you to give me the people, but not necessarily engaging in how that happens. Or trying to make it happen also for themselves. I'm going to point to you, Tom, as not one of those employers. You're constantly thinking of how can I create my workforce and then we need to help nurture those kinds of efforts in every way that we can. But, that can be an uncomfortable space if we're of a board. If we're really going to embrace this, we can't ignore that other part, because we're not just about producing the people when our partners can't do it without funding and support.
And our leadership ideally leverages all those resources and some coherent strategy. And that's why I keep pitching the leadership notion. I don't think we should be shy about it, because no one else is going to as well. So
So since we're already here in the discussion, I would suggest, let's look at the strategies. Let's start on goal 4 and look at the strategies. Because like I said, we're already started kind of talking about that, and let's make sure that we have what we need from a strategy perspective. So right now, whether we keep it backbone, whether we add leadership, right? We have that visibility piece. We have leveraging data. That's something that I heard in my research, that you are a source of data, of workforce data, and that's very important. Growing the board's thought leadership. So that there's the advocacy piece and the convening piece of things. Influencing solutions to regional workforce challenges like transportation, housing, childcare. So there's that, what we've been talking about right now, serving all types of employees and all types of employers. And then bringing more resources to workforce development. So that's that sort of funding backbone piece of things, right? Is passing through funding to various workforce providers, and therefore, again, serving all kinds of employees and all kinds of employers. So does this encompass what we've been talking about thus far in terms of being a backbone or being a leader, or is there anything missing? Is there anything funky?
Used to be something in here about convening all of the other organizations and players that we were talking about. If you think about it, I mean, it's almost like we have our strategic plan as a board, but there's a whole ecosystem of organizations like yours and others that are going to be necessary to help us meet our goals, and how are we convening them and kind of putting a multi-organizational set of goals and plans in place.
So you think more than both three then, Stephen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or call it out?
Advocacy and convening, I think you're talking about more operational.
Operational.
Well, what were you going to say something?
No, I was gonna say, I agree with Stephen, and I thought it was covered in bullet point 3, but I hear the distinction you're making.
Yeah.
Still as a thought leadership, in bringing those entities together in different sets, employers, providers, workforce board. Yeah.
Yeah, to me, thought leadership is also about sort of ensuring that the system is right. Whether you want to call it an ecosystem or system, but I think that's the one piece in bullet point 3 maybe that's missing a little bit. I agree with advocacy, I agree with being a convener. But, you know, we're sort of, we represent the public entities too, with respect to thinking about the workforce system. And so I don't know exactly how you say it, but that's kind of where I'm at. So I guess I agree with Stephen as well.
So we could add a strategy that is specific to that coordination, that systems level.
Yeah, or you can tie it to thought leadership, I think, the third bullet. Point is, you want to be thought leadership about the entire workforce ecosystem. Thought leaders.
Do you think that it might be for that particular piece? Is that it is a little more, it's more than just a thought leadership, though. It's actually, I mean, that's where the backbone becomes, right? The backbone is your spine, carries your nervous system, and that runs everything else in the body, right? And so for that particular piece, it's more than just like thought leadership. We're actually,
It's like strategic leadership.
yeah, right. We're strategically leading, we're actually bringing money, we're, you know, helping everybody to see where they fit in the system. I mean, some of the things we're doing is we want to start to share data. Right now, we hired Jeff Beal to help us put in a formal structure to the Workforce Advisory Council so that people actually say, yes, we're part of the system, and here's what we're going to do, and here's what we want the board to do. And that to me seems more than just advocating and convening, it's actually running.
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to Stephen's point about operation. I think that's what it goes back to. I think somehow we have to incorporate that into maybe what you're saying, because I think you and Stephen are saying the same thing.
You're describing a backbone organization when you, right? You're describing a backbone organization.
Yeah, I think that's where you felt like it needed to be leadership, and it's in there in the strategy. The backbone piece is not in the strategy, and that, like I said, I think that is defining what a backbone is. Yeah.
I think I think thought leadership is a subset of broader strategic leadership. And so, you know, thought leadership can get reduced to writing op-eds or something. This is like on the ground, doing it, bringing people together. So I don't know. I know it's just.
Just words do matter, though. You know,
Absolutely.
words do matter.
I guess I would say I would agree with Brian, that I think thought leadership is a subset of broader concept of leadership. Leadership within the system.
So could we just change it to grow the board's strategic leadership? Including strong advocacy, convening various sets of entities, and
And-
implementing operational strategies for the system.
I say backbone, put all of that in red.
Pardon?
And say backbone and then all of that in red. Because again, you're describing a backbone.
Mhm.
I know people don't think that's very glamorous. No,
But
but it is a thing.
it is a thing.
Right.
There are worse body parts we could.
So do we want backbone in the language of the goal, or do we want that to be leader?
Backbone leader.
I like the idea of strategic, grow the word strategic leadership, that feels like that could have that leader.
Okay, but in the strategy, do we want to keep backbone in the goal, or do we want to add leadership?
Even though we said the last time our thing wasn't bold enough, I think we need to be bold, just use the word leader.
We want to be the leader. Yeah.
We'll pronounce it right, leader.
And then the backbone.
And then have backbone in the strategy.
I love it.
Your character. I think that is there. The concepts and strategies to me are all. So that's just wordsmithing at this point.
Okay. Excellent. Anything else? Anything missing here? In being a leader? We're being a leader, and then we're describing what that looks like, and it includes being a backbone. Leader is bigger than backbone, I guess, right? Awesome. Okay. So let's work backwards, because we were also talking through the employers piece. So here are the current draft strategies under goal 3. Providing, so there's the ecosystem navigation hub kind of concepts, increasing employer involvement in the activities of the workforce board. When the steering committee was talking about potential metrics, they said that one metric would be that more employers are engaging with us, more employers are using our services and sticking with us. Promoting improved employer workplace culture and employee support. And so again, this gets at employers of all levels. When you're talking about folks who might need, employees that might need connection to social services. Educating employers about best practice around retention and facilitating the sector cooperation and coordination. I heard a lot of really good things about the sector partnerships and how valuable those are, and how there's even more potential there. So how do these land with our conversation earlier about, are there types of employers that the board should be focused on? Are there specific things that prosperity wage employers need from us?
So I would argue, rather than specifically outlining in a strategic plan a type of employer, I think you want to have a conversation about identifying employers that are consistent with either the community's needs or the priorities at the time. So it allows you to be nimble and think differently if circumstances change. So rather than saying we should just focus on X, Y, and Z employers, I think the general language should be about having that flexibility to pivot if circumstances change in 3 or 5 years, or they've changed since Intel came, for instance.
So something like employers that are meeting community needs or responsive to community needs, or
Yeah, I don't, no, not necessarily that, but just, Let me think about it.
You know, we, have tossed around this idea of employer, this moniker of employers of choice, and there's debate, and there's debate even among us on staff, whether that's a good idea to do, and how would you do that, and how would, could the board start, identifying what objectively is an employer of choice, but doing it in a way that would include employers who maybe aren't able to pay what we would consider the prosperity wage, but they're attacking their job quality in a different way because we need those jobs. And are you?
I mean, actually, employer of choice, as long as you sort of have the qualifier that could change. How you define employer of choice, depending on circumstances within the community. I guess that's what I'm driving at. I don't want to lock us in for the next 5 years to say we're going to focus on, IT and this and this. That may be what we need today. It may not be what we need in 3 years.
That's true. Since Intel's coming, and Intel is in advanced manufacturing is what
Right.
they are, and that is not something that our board has focused on.
Right.
Because much of our advanced manufacturing before all of this, and even Hyperion and all that, has been on the edge of our county. So it hasn't really, but I think now, and especially if we're working more regionally, adding advanced manufacturing is something we need to do because now it's there in a bigger way. So that's really, I couldn't have predicted Intel. Maybe Sean could have, but he didn't share that information.
NDAs, Lisa, NDA.
Yes. Whoever else is coming, that's what your point is,
Yeah.
right? And we know there are others out there that might change.
Yeah.
The mix.
Well, I think we evolve as industries evolve in our community. So 5 years ago, we weren't talking about Intel or semiconductors. 5 years ago, we weren't talking about solar as an industry here in Columbus, Ohio, and now we are. And so we have to be able to adapt based on the needs and the emerging technologies and industries that are coming to the region. And so that flexibility has to be part of how we operate and how we move. So the employer of choice, to Eric's point, can change based on the community's needs and what employers are asking us to do. And if we want to engage with these employers, we have to move at the speed that they need. And so I don't know what my answer is, but I just think like there are industries in our region right now that weren't here 5 years ago. And so that means the needs of the board has changed accordingly. So
Yeah, and I think it's a simple statement, whatever strategy makes sense to acknowledge that the board is flexible and nimble, or some, employers of choice subject to change, however you want to do it. That's all. I think we need to be explicit about that.
Yeah.
You feel comfortable with that? Something like employers of choice, and then that will be defined somewhere.
I'm interested to see the definition when we finish.
Yeah. I'm wondering if employer of choice is actually a little bit different than sectors we focus on.
yeah,
Yes.
Yeah.
probably.
So I think what we're talking about here is more like what sector should we focus on, and that can change. Employer of choice is more of an individual employer and how they operate with their life.
I would advocate for that. Get clear on sectors if you want to do that, but I would shy away from employer of choice.
Yeah,
Do we need to
Very
get clear
clear.
on the sector? Like, it doesn't, as I'm reading it right now, I'm not seeing any restrictions on particular sectors.
It wasn't-
So if it's not explicit here, does it need to be explicit at all? Because that gives us full flexibility.
Yeah, I don't think it needs to be explicit. I think we need that flexibility.
I mean, it says facilitate sector cooperation and coordination, and that's subject to change over time depending on the needs.
Yeah.
I like it.
Everything on here is gonna have a KPI, right? So everything here has to be measurable. So if you think of it from that perspective, can we measure every single one? All those are the right things, and can we measure those? Right?
there I would defer to my data extraordinaire guy over there, Pierre, is his job. one of the things we do, we monitor what the state is saying are our top occupations. We monitor, we are looking at who's coming in. That's how we make policy about who we're gonna train and what we're gonna pay for. We have to do that annually anyways, so, annually saying intentionally at the board, okay, we review our strategies and here's the focus and here's the data that says this is why the focus is. Maybe?
No,
Right? And that way it doesn't have to be called out explicitly, and then next week a big announcement comes and we're like, oh, great, we're already wrong in our strategy. Which is adaptable.
We need to be even on, like the third bullet point, beyond social services, should we be even more specific on the cross-cutting stuff like childcare and transportation? I know that narrows it down a little bit, but it's anything we're doing that enhances the infrastructure in those realms, collaboration. That's, maybe too specific, I don't know.
Yeah, that is an idea, that's it, because I'm being approached all the time. I've been asked to participate on 2 different regional housing conversations, right? And then we had been involved in childcare conversations pretty heavily before, actually, the pandemic. So that might be something where you want to be specific about maybe 2 or 3 issues so that we don't all of a sudden become, oh yeah, the board's gonna support that, or the board's gonna support everything, that we're supporting kind of some key things that are directly related to getting people, keeping people in employment.
Yeah, like the CHIPS Act and the Intel stuff, they're required to provide childcare. Now, can we leverage that with them to do a more community-wide focus with us in some realm of leadership on that? Those are the kind of cross-cutting things that seem possible, and it's always in those issues, transportation, childcare, maybe there's another one, are always going to be employer concerns. So I think if we were going to get that specific, I think that might be worth considering.
So just to point out, this here would be specific to the work with employers, there's a strategy on both for like the leader one around sort of working on those issues writ large. Just wanted to point that out. I'm not sure.
Okay.
It doesn't mean you don't also want to be more specific here. I just wanted to point out the distinction.
That's true. This was more about the idea that actually Catholic Social Services is moving to. That's right. Which is this idea that once employers, especially employers who are in that lower wage category, have employees and then they run into, they might be great. Yeah, boring.
There's like a pep rally going on.
Employees, but they need housing or childcare, they need other kinds of assistance. That they are looking to get funded with navigators, kind of like EAP. EAP is for health and mental health.
Yeah.
So this would be a broader EAP initiative where an employer could say, all right, Don is having a hard time finding housing, is to be evicted. Next week, he's a great employee. I can send him to this navigator who will help navigate them. Yeah. Unless there's something going on, you have to share with me. Okay. I put my hands behind my back.
Do you guys want to do a chant? Because we can have rival meetings.
Can I just ask a question about one of the bullet points?
Absolutely.
The third bullet point, promote improved employer workplace culture. Kind of wondering what the thinking was behind that. That's difficult, I would think, for us to influence and certainly measure. So I'm just curious as to what the thought process was for including specifically culture.
Sure, so we got funding from the state, partnering with the chamber to do the DEI incubator. The point of that is by helping those companies who don't have the ability to hire someone full-time, or who really need help changing their culture to make their culture a more welcoming, helps with retention and attraction.
Okay.
Right? And so there are strategies that I think that we can champion that are on a strategic level with employers that we can do to affect that. That's
That's
what
helpful. I just wasn't clear about
And some
why that was.
employers specifically said that they need help with that kind of thing.
Eric, to your question though, about metrics and measures, it is one that we talked about that was probably going to be measured from an activity standpoint. How many times do we have these, as opposed to an outcome?
Outcomes, that's difficult to really.
So, as we were having these conversations, we were looking obviously for more outcomes, but some of them from a measurement standpoint will probably be more activity based.
So in this focus area or goal area, we were talking about more outcomes and value adds for employers, such as expanding the amount of licensures or industry certification. We've been in this conversation before about the work we're doing. Are we producing folks, right, or having folks achieve certain things that are required to allow them to get a better paying job, like licenses and certifications? Do you want to have a conversation about something here? I don't see it up there.
Yeah, I see a lot of that in the work of the sector partnerships and helping, right, with the healthcare sector partnership, and maybe it's not as explicitly.
Does that become an operational kind of tactical dimension to one of these, increase this number of certifications or do this and that? I don't know.
Well, maybe it's under, okay, now that I'm looking.
Is it retention?
Now that I look under 2, when I say increase employer involvement in the activities of the board, maybe it's increase the board's involvement in the needs of employers. Because as opposed to them being involved in our, we're here to serve them. And those are the kinds of things, then when you operationalize it, things like the sector partnership that's what that's about.
I like that flip,
I do too.
because it is more.
I just saw that.
Yeah.
Well, that's more within our span of control. What we
Can you
can.
repeat that? I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Thank God we're recording it. Jen. That's why, because
A
I
good thought.
say these
It's
things,
hard to
and then I'm
repeat a
like,
good thought, you
what
know?
did
It's flipping.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So increasing the board's involvement with employer practices, which can
Right.
still be measured by how many employers are engaging with you, but it's.
And then how we're affecting, I mean, we
Right.
can actually
Mhm.
say, all right, in our sector partnership, how many more, what the goals of the partnership become the goals of the board, kind of thing.
Mhm. Okay, we'll make that flip. Anything else on this? Cool. All right. Still moving backwards, although again, the order, we'll come back to the order of goals. The order of goals is not important in terms of priority. So more job seekers are matched to opportunities that lead to prosperity. So there's a sort of geographic strategy, right, about providing services to people where they are. Heard a lot about the importance of virtual, the importance of not sort of making people come all the way to the job center. It's not convenient for them, or it's not easy for them to get to be proactively finding employees that have been downsized or laid off. there's the strategy around supporting job seekers right through to employment. And this is back to the social services piece, right? The direct and wraparound services that leads them to success in employment and beyond. Promoting the transition. And again, we can mess with the language here, but the transition of entry-level job seekers to mid-level job seekers by developing transferable skills for the local economy. And that includes training, apprenticeship, other on the job. So that's kind of where the training certification piece comes in as well. Driving employer best practices. And this kind of gets to the prosperity wage, right? And employers of choice or what have you, driving their best practices around wages, benefits, and hiring. And then partnering with educational institutions using workforce data to help inform training and certification programs. That's sort of the partnering with Columbus State and vocational schools, trade schools. Again, with your perspective on what's coming down the pike, what kind of training degree certifications are going to be needed and are going to lead people into these prosperity wage jobs.
Is there anything here, and I don't know whether this is the case or not, so you can guide me, but is there anything here that needs to be about proactive understanding of what jobs are coming next? Because if we're not thinking ahead in terms of what the needs are, I don't know that we can, that's a step in being able to provide more job seekers with opportunities. Because we kind of have to be ahead of that curve.
Right,
Opposed to reactive, and each one of these seem dead on, but they seem reactive in terms of the status quo, not necessarily forward thinking.
So, analyzing the labor market, I'm looking at Karen and Courtney, and understanding that and starting to provide more data on that, like through our website and to our businesses, through our newsletter that we've just started, and, brand new. I wonder if that actually doesn't go here, but more broadly goes under being the backbone organization.
That's what I mean. I don't know that I know we do it, and I know it's important. I don't know whether it's here or it's somewhere else. Yeah.
But you're right, that if
The second bullet could kind of
increase
get
the organization's ability to leverage workforce data. Yeah, I guess that's where that's okay.
Does
Maybe we
that-
want to take. Do
Does
you
that
want to
work,
say something
Nicole?
more
or-
there, Nicole?
It
Make sure we're
works, I
capturing that?
think, when we put metrics to it, I think it'll make more sense, right? Because it'll be increase the organizations to leverage workforce data, but what? And so I think that's where once the metrics are there, it'll fit them.
Okay.
Thank you for that, though. Sure.
I assume that we'll have an idea of what we mean by prosperity. We're going to define that. I don't think we have to do it today. I assume that.
Yeah, I mean, if we define prosperity in the actual data, it's way more than $20 an hour, just saying that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because I love the term prosperity wage, but $20 isn't prosperity wage.
No,
You're
it's
barely
livable.
surviving.
Before the pandemic, it was $26 according to the Women's Fund, and now it's got to be much higher than that. So,
Does one Columbus have a definition of prosperity that's kind of?
Yeah, if you're looking for an individual metric, there's no metric. I think I'd sit probably at least a bunch of data points that we kind of, we monitor to see, are we prospering as a region or are we falling behind other communities in terms of certain metrics? But in terms of our definition of prosperity, it's, kind of
Whatever you want it to be.
it's very broad.
Sean,
But
after I got your email, I thought it was like beauty in the eyes of the beholder.
It kind of is, just because there's so many things that make up that metric, right? In terms of defining what prosperity means. It's improving the social and economic well-being of all of our citizens. So that could mean a lot of things to a lot of people. But it is, can you afford a home? Can your kids go to good schools? are jobs paying a certain wage? Are they paying, how many jobs do you have that are plus over $75,000 in a community? How many jobs do you have that are less than 75,000? So those kind of monitors that we're monitoring on an ongoing basis to kind of track our progress or lack thereof in our community. So it's very broad, Brian. So that's the best thing we can do because to Rocky's point, it is kind of in the eye of the beholder.
So I went to the website that the Prosperity Now,
Mhm.
that were, yeah, they're like 50 metric. That's a lot.
Well, and what's interesting is I don't think about prosperity as one particular metric or final destination point. I kind of think of it as the ladder model. You're trying to get people at the bottom end up and people in the middle up further, and you actually acknowledge that at point number 3. So, do we want to say we lead them to prosperity or towards prosperity? Does that matter?
I personally want to get them in prosperity, but
Okay, or at least more prosperous, right? And then so
Yeah.
as you're thinking about going up that ladder, you want to take them from where they are to some higher level than that. And
Is it
so,
a 2-year plan or 3-year plan?
Great.
So, I think-
So you can totally get to prosperity in 3 years.
Whatever, well, that's just, we're gonna, it's not that we're gonna make adjustments to this plan, right? And we're gonna be revising it, so this would be the first step, and so we're getting towards, right? Yeah. Just thinking it through.
I also
Tourism
could be
more.
parsing it just a little too much. So this is what happens when you get me thinking.
well,
Stage
just as a matter of history, for those who were on the board right at the beginning, first couple of years, remember we were looking at, we were focused on people who were at 100% of poverty to 300% of poverty because we knew that for the most part, they were doing something to bring in income if they were over 100% of poverty. So they may not be working full time, they may be working in a gig or black market, but they had income up to 300% of poverty. And the idea was to focus on that group and where were the jobs and how do we move those people into 400 to 500% of poverty so that we had some kind of measurable thing. And then our strategies were focused on that, knowing that before the pandemic, a quarter of the population in Franklin County, a quarter of the households were at 200% of poverty or below. If we were to look at that now, we think, although I haven't actually seen actual measurements yet, right, that there are more people living at 200% of poverty and below, more households in Franklin County. And that gap is getting bigger. So, I mean, I think there are data points that we can, and I think we're going to be a little bit different than on Columbus's measures of prosperity, because it's, first of all, they're measuring the region,
Yeah.
to 11 counties. And what that means in Logan County is a heck of a lot different than what it means in Franklin County, right? But for us, it can be a little more targeted. And although we aren't going to be, maybe with the whole system, we're not going to be able to totally move a needle. Our strategies can be focused on moving that needle.
yeah, at least I recall when we did that and we paired that with kind of a sector focuses.
We did. We
Yeah.
chose finance and insurance.
Yep. CSRs we were doing for a while, and I think we did something in hospitality, I think, as well. I think those were kind of some of the
Yeah.
industries that we were kind of sector focused in on at the time. Because we were pairing it with where these folks are at, what
Right.
jobs they're in,
Right,
and what was needed actually. So,
right.
yeah.
So I don't know if we want to, I mean, I think we ought to, maybe as we look at this, we think about those things.
Well, so the way I think about it is goal 3 is more about individual job seekers, or goal 2 is more about individual job seekers. Goal 3 is about employers and goal 4 is about the system. So it's not about trying to figure out that macro piece. It's sort of a micro piece, to use sort of economic terminology. It's how are you helping individuals get there?
Well, true. I mean, because it could inform, we may be supporting people into jobs that are below whatever we determine that prosperity wage is, but we're only going to pay for training where someone, once they get that certificate of licensure or credential, are going to go into a wage that is going to pay over a certain amount. That's what resiliency bridge is. All of our training, if you're getting rental assistance for 12 months while you're in training, the only way we'll do that is if those trainings result in a job that's, get this, $19.33, which is the housing wage, which is way too low.
Yeah.
But that's what resiliency bridge is. So we can do other things like that in our actual tactic, I guess. The job, how you're committing to figure that all out, please support us if we figure that all out.
So would towards prosperity be more comfortable? Since it's 3 years.
Yeah, yeah.
It's more comfortable if we have at least internally some working definition of what that might mean.
Mhm.
It's like, it's a great word, like backbone, but it's also. It's the backbone of this.
Stick to the back.
But it's also fairly imprecise. or
That's
in
fair.
that way.
Yeah, there was talk in the steering committee of kind of a glossary.
Yeah.
So we might. Well, we'll make sure we do that in the sort of narrative piece of the plan.
The 1933, you said that was rich.
Wait, what?
Housing.
Wage.
Housing.
1930.
Not, so, yeah, $19.33 when they first conceived a resiliency bridge, so it's probably wrong now. The housing wage for the ability, what someone would have to make to cover rent at a very basic level in Central Ohio, I am pretty sure it is higher now. I just,
Fall quickly with pandemic and cost housing, right, shot up in rent. I mean, 1933, I don't know what apartment you could.
Right.
1933, right? Or one, maybe a one bedroom somewhere.
I completely agree, and if you knew all of the struggles we had with the group we were working with to explain to them that if you want to accomplish this, 1933 is not even going to do it, and the kinds of jobs where we knew we could get people into those wages, we got so much pushback from our partners on that because they just don't understand, that's not their world.
I'm asking that question. I mean, there's the MIP wage, right? And right now that is 2 adults, 1 kid, both working 1873. There's all these different various versions of what an hourly wage is. And we're talking about young people and entry points, mid-level jobs. I've inquired a couple of times about Find Your Ohio for healthcare, right? There's a fund set aside to advertise in the states to bring healthcare workers to Ohio. What was their response about healthcare jobs? We don't pay enough.
Pay more, I believe is what the
So-
lieutenant governor said, you guys need to pay more.
I think we're all sort of stuck in a spot where
I know.
what is that job we're trying to get them to? That starts the path towards prosperity. Is we'll just keep recycling the system, right? If we focus our efforts on jobs that don't get them to at least whatever that wage number we wanted ever did, right? And then there's an expectation when we write a grant, what's the wage you're making that at? And we've got to match some of our efforts to that. Can't do everything all the time. But we got to focus on getting people out of this. Always being people coming into it. But I feel like a lot of times we start talking about, we want to include, the hospitality. If we can recycle people into it, they're gonna come right back. If it's $12 an hour, $13 an hour, what do we do to get them out? And we gotta figure out what that wage is. Now, I like the path towards prosperity, we gotta figure out what that is too, but I've personally heard the term of the prosperity wage and a housing wage, I've not heard of those. We use the MAT stuff where I've been, but struggling with that part a little bit. Where are we to focus our time and our limited attention that we have? We can't just do everything. And a lot of this is do everything. What's that wage line we're gonna make people hold to?
Or what are the, when I look at number 3 there, here are the strategies that we're trying to use is, well, we're trying to grow our apprenticeship strategy, right? Because even though in an apprenticeship, people come in, but there's a set graduated, you learn this skill, then you get this raise, you learn this skill, you get this raise, right? And it's a way, take people who need to learn skills. It's a way for employers to start employing them and training them at the same time. You know, our on-the-job training programs, we use most of those with small employers to help them bring people on, and then train them and be able to pay them more. I think it's the strategies maybe is what are the strategies we're gonna use?
I'm just trying to figure out what we're gonna focus, which, what we're gonna prioritize in terms of making sure that they're not sticking the job. I'll tell you a story. Ohio State, we started an employee resource center. So if you need help internally at Ohio State, you can have them, we have food and clothing and housing assistance and things that we can offer. But it all started because someone noticed in our cafeteria, there was a family there every day. And at first, everybody thought that family was someone who had a family member in the hospital. The same mom, and a couple kids, every day. And finally, somebody asked. And it turned out they lived in their car. The dad worked at the hospital. And that's where they went during the day. That was a safe, warm place to be. So our CHR at the time, Allison, whose spot I'm sitting in now, actually funded and built an employee resource center to address it. So even in large employers, places like Ohio State, right, there are people who aren't that wage yet.
Yeah,
But it's a step, right? I mean, if you're at Ohio State, there's something like insurance. So I think the wage is so important, but it's also the wraparound services of somebody having insurance where they can get.
Oh, sure.
You know, and then it's a stepping stone, you're gonna help them hit the next. So I think when we look at wages, I think they are so important, but I also think you have to start somewhere to get them in. So whether it's an apprenticeship or in a place like cornucopia, or, you know, all of these places that offer the other things like benefits, insurance, that gets them to the next level. I don't know.
well, then, you know, that's that focus, maybe it's more like a focus on any employer, but again, this job quality idea.
Right, and it has to be a path out, right?
Right.
Later, I mean, there should be some demonstrated path they're gonna follow to work towards. And that's just what our aspiration is. Because with limited resources, we don't want to put them in a place where they're gonna be plugged in, left, and never able to move up.
Right.
And that's, we're doing more as an employer because we recognize the employee resource center is there for a reason. The entry-level job, not the destination. But how do we apportion our resources of the board properly to make sure that who we're giving the support to from an employer perspective are the right ones?
Yeah, so it goes back to employer.
Right.
I know you don't like that employer choice, or employers who are willing, who are good employers.
They are,
That invest.
and the entry level doesn't have to be that level, but we got to be able to make the logical case that there's a path to that level. And that there's some track record that suggests that employer is committed to putting people on that path. I don't know how you measure that stuff, but but we don't necessarily have to have an X figure to start people. So we should at least be able to evaluate the notion that it could be there over time. And I don't know how you do that, leave that to the experts, but it feels like that at least should be a bottom line for our allocation criteria.
As we think about the job seeker and their needs, and then the supportive services that one might provide to remove the employment barriers so they can be successful. The other thing we have to factor in is the benefits cliff. So some of the low wage job earners may actually receive supportive services that is based on income, income eligibility. And part of the challenge is as you try and where you receive support to that next level, is that you could potentially, as a job seeker, take a job paying a higher wage, but actually lose the support and have a lower quality of life. Something that I've seen an employer do that I thought was pretty innovative is he said, you know, tell me what that wage is where they can keep the supportive services. Let's keep, to your point, we have a digital badging service as you learn skills, and you earn a higher wage. But instead of me giving you that wage right now, I'm gonna put this in a holding account. So you're earning it, but you can retain